The news broke like thunder. Only 1 minute ago, the palace gates fell silent. Reporters swarmed, the air quivering with disbelief. Queen Camilla had fallen gravely ill, perhaps fatally, but behind the trembling curtains of Buckingham Palace, the reaction was not uniform. Some wept, others whispered. The royal family's faces betrayed more than grief. They hid something deeper, something the public was never meant to see. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The official statement arrived with haunting precision, released by the palace's press secretary at 6:04 p.m. sharp. Her Majesty, Queen Camilla, is in critical condition following a sudden collapse. The words echoed across the nation like a funeral bell, their cold finality leaving no room for doubt. Yet inside the palace, where chandeliers glowed dim and the air smelled of tension, grief was not the only presence. There was restraint. There was calculation. The staff had been ordered to remain silent, their phones confiscated, and their movements restricted to specific corridors. No one was to speak to the press. No one was to speculate. The monarchy's walls, once symbolic of dignity, now pulsed with unspoken fear. Princess Anne was among the first to arrive at the Queen's private quarters, but unlike the others, her face betrayed no visible distress. Her eyes were sharp, her expression unreadable. Those who knew her well understood this was not coldness, it was control. She was a soldier of decorum, forged by decades of duty, and she had learned that emotion was a weakness, easily exploited within these gilded walls. As aides scurried with trembling hands, Anne's voice cut through the chaos with surgical clarity, commanding stillness. Yet beneath her composure, something stirred a suspicion that this tragedy was not what it appeared to be. Prince William, by contrast, stood motionless at the end of the hallway. Pale, tense, and wordless, he clasped his hands behind his back, his jaw rigid, as if holding in something far more volatile than sorrow. He had faced public scandal before, but this was different. The whispers were not about rumor, they were about power. He had seen the signs, the odd shifts in Camilla's behavior, the veiled comments at recent council meetings. It was as though the Queen had foreseen something inevitable. Now, as he stared toward her sealed chamber door, an invisible chill crept down his spine, not of grief, but of foreboding. The palace staff exchanged fleeting glances, their silence punctuated by the ticking of antique clocks. A junior attendant swore she saw Anne and William exchange a glance too deliberate to be coincidence, the look of two people aware that the tragedy unfolding before them was more than an accident of fate. Meanwhile, courtiers debated quietly among themselves. If this were truly a medical emergency, where was the king? Why had not Charles not made an appearance or even issued a personal statement? His absence was deafening, and for those who understood palace rhythms, it signified one thing: crisis management behind closed doors. By evening, outside the palace gates, crowds gathered with candles, their murmurs of sympathy echoing through the cold London air. News anchors wore black ties, their tones somber as tributes poured in. Yet behind that public sorrow lay a growing unease. The timeline of Camilla's collapse made no sense. She had last been seen only hours before, radiant and articulate, hosting a closed-door charity briefing. What could have changed so suddenly? The contradictions spread faster than confirmation, and within hours, social media erupted with speculation. Was the Queen poisoned? Did she know too much? Where is King Charles? Inside, the senior courtiers scrambled to maintain composure. They issued additional briefings, carefully worded to emphasize medical privacy, ongoing evaluation. But the choice of words did more harm than help. Evaluation, unstable condition, awaiting confirmation. It all sounded rehearsed, the kind of precision used to contain a scandal, not comfort a nation. Anne caught the phrasing immediately and demanded an unedited copy of the original statement. What she found chilled her. The first draft had been altered. The line, "Her Majesty is being treated for a chronic cardiac issue," had been replaced with, "Her Majesty is in critical condition." Someone wanted the nation to believe this was sudden. Someone wanted panic. And then came the whispers, faint but persistent, rippling through the servants' quarters and across the private wings. This wasn't an illness. This was no accident. The rumor spread like wildfire, its source impossible to trace. Some claimed it came from within Camilla's own staff. Others insisted a royal aide had overheard an argument earlier that morning between the Queen and a senior advisor. Whatever the truth, one fact was clear. The tragedy that now gripped Britain had been building long before that fateful collapse. The air within the palace grew heavier. As the night deepened, every clock tick felt like a heartbeat counting down to revelation. Anne withdrew to her private office, her composure unbroken but her mind ablaze with suspicion. William remained by the window of the North Corridor, watching the gathering crowds from afar. His reflection caught between the glass and the flickering lights, below a man trapped between duty and dread. The royal household's walls, steeped in centuries of silence, had seen betrayal before, but this time, the betrayal felt intimate, deliberate, and its ripples would reach every corner of the monarchy before the dawn. Yet, even as Britain mourned, a single phrase whispered through the palace corridors. This was no accident. To understand the tragedy, one must trace the footsteps that led to it. In the week before, her sudden decline, Camilla's movements were shrouded in secrecy. Meetings cancelled, private doctors summoned, and a restricted East Wing sealed from all but her most trusted aide. The public saw frailty, but those inside the palace saw fear. Something had frightened the Queen. At first, it appeared ordinary, a brief retreat from the relentless schedule that defined royal life. The palace issued a quiet statement citing temporary exhaustion and urged the public not to worry. Yet, those who served in her inner circle knew better. Camilla was not one to step away from duty without cause. Behind her graceful composure and ceremonial smiles lived a woman accustomed to control, not surrender. When she suddenly withdrew from 3 high-profile appearances in a single week, alarm rippled through the corridors. Something had changed. And whatever it was, she wanted no one to see it. Her trusted physician, the official royal doctor, had been replaced overnight by a man no one recognized. His name never appeared on the medical registry provided to the palace staff. A quiet figure in dark attire, he arrived under escort and left without exchanging a word. He was said to have treated her in complete privacy, forbidding even her ladies-in-waiting from entering the room. When questioned, the Queen's aide simply stated that Her Majesty requires absolute discretion. But in the palace, secrecy always meant something more. It meant fear. It meant danger. Princess Anne was among the first to notice the unusual tightening of security around the East Wing. Guards stationed at every entrance, curtains drawn at all hours. Even the routine cleaning staff were abruptly reassigned. Anne, who had seen countless royal crises unfold in her lifetime, found the behavior excessive, even paranoid. What could the Queen possibly be hiding behind those locked doors? Her instincts told her that something was deeply wrong. When she quietly inquired about the new doctor's credentials, she was told that all inquiries must be approved, directly through Her Majesty's office. It was a diplomatic way of saying, "Stay out." Elsewhere, Prince William's private secretary stumbled upon something equally unsettling. An intercepted memo marked in red ink with the chilling words, "For her eyes only." The message had been routed from an encrypted internal server, bypassing normal channels entirely. What it contained was never revealed, but its tone suggested urgency and secrecy at the highest level. William was informed, though reluctantly. His reaction was measured, almost too calm, but his order was immediate. Keep monitoring the line. Do not alert the king. Meanwhile, King Charles found himself increasingly shut out. Twice he attempted to visit Camilla in her private quarters, and twice he was turned away by her staff with the same explanation, "Her Majesty is resting." The second time, his temper broke. He demanded to know why a husband could not see his own wife, only to be told that the Queen had expressly forbidden it. Those present said his face turned pale, his voice barely above a whisper when he muttered, "Then something has gone terribly wrong." That same night, Another disappearance occurred, one that went unnoticed by the public but sent ripples through the palace hierarchy. A royal courier, responsible for transferring confidential correspondence between departments, vanished without trace. Along with him went the Queen's personal diary, a journal she had guarded obsessively for years. Within those pages were believed to be her private reflections, fears, and even grievances. Losing it was no mere accident. It was an act of erasure, and those who understood palace politics knew that erasure was often the prelude to exposure. From that moment on, the Queen's behavior shifted from anxious to erratic. She ordered late-night calls to her staff, demanded full background checks on senior aides, and insisted that certain rooms be swept for hidden recording devices. To outsiders, it looked like the behavior of a woman under immense pressure, but to those closest to her, it felt like something else, as if she were being hunted by a truth she could no longer contain. The East Wing had become her fortress, but within those walls, the Queen was a prisoner of her own making. Anne's concern deepened with every passing day. She approached William discreetly, her tone sharp but cautious. "Whatever is happening," she warned, "it's not illness, it's strategy." William listened, his brow furrowed in thought, yet his reply was quiet and unnerving. "Then, someone has already made their move." The two exchanged no further words, but the silence between them was heavy with understanding. They knew that if the Queen was hiding something, uncovering it would come at a price. The palace exterior remained calm, a symbol of unity to the public. But behind those gilded doors, tension gnawed like a silent plague. Servants whispered that the Queen's health was merely a mask, a cover for something far more consequential. And as that week drew to its chilling close, the signs of unraveling multiplied. The corridors once filled with ceremony now echoed with unease, and those sworn to protect the crown began to realize they were also guarding its darkest secret. Whatever haunted Camilla in those final days had begun tightening its grip, and those closest to her were already turning against each other. Anne had always been the crown's silent sentinel, unyielding, rational, and brutally observant. When she entered Camilla's sealed wing under pretense of security review, what she found shattered the illusion of sickness. Empty medicine vials, torn letters, a locked drawer filled with unsigned documents, and a single medical report marked forged. The so-called illness wasn't consuming Camilla's body, it was consuming the monarchy's credibility. For years, Princess Anne had been the unshakable backbone of the royal institution, the one person who stood above politics and sentiment. But as she stepped deeper into the Queen's private quarters, something inside her shifted. The air was heavy, the silence suffocating, and yet it was not grief that filled her, it was suspicion. The palace had seen scandals before, but this one smelled different. This one reeked of orchestration. The first thing she noticed was the medication tray on the desk, a chaotic scatter of empty vials without dosage records. No physician, royal or private, would ever permit such disorder. The deeper she looked, the more it became clear. Someone had staged this room to resemble illness, not to conceal it. Anne began quietly collecting evidence. Her hands, steady as ever, lifted the falsified medical report, and in the upper corner, she spotted a signature that made her blood run cold. The handwriting of the attending physician did not match the official royal doctor's known signature. The forgery was elegant, almost flawless, but Anne's eye for detail was sharper than most. When she compared the ink pattern to a past document, the inconsistency was undeniable. Whoever had drafted this report wanted to convince the world that Camilla was critically ill. But the truth was far darker. Her collapse was planned, and the paperwork was designed to disguise it. As Anne continued her quiet inspection, she uncovered an even more sinister clue, a classified memorandum embedded within the false medical report titled Operation Silhouette. No such code had ever appeared in royal archives or security briefings. The name alone sent a chill through her. It implied concealment, not care a plan rooted in secrecy and deceit. Anne's instincts told her that this operation was not about protecting Camilla, but eliminating scrutiny around her sudden disappearance from duty. Whoever orchestrated it had the resources to manipulate official channels, override medical protocols, and even forge royal records. Her investigation deepened when she found a sealed envelope tucked inside the drawer beneath the medical file. The front bore a single set of initials, E.P., written in Camilla's unmistakable cursive. No title, no name, only that haunting abbreviation. The contents of the letter were cryptic, phrased in the language of caution. It must be done before the ceremony. He cannot be allowed to stand unchallenged. The meaning was veiled, but the target was unmistakable: Prince William. Anne froze, realizing that what she held could ignite a firestorm capable of tearing apart the monarchy from within. Determined to confirm her fears, Anne summoned Camilla's personal aide under the guise of a procedural inquiry. The young man arrived pale and trembling, his composure unraveling with every passing second. She began with questions that seemed harmless about security access, visitor logs, and physician scheduling. But when she mentioned the forged report, his mask cracked. His eyes darted to the drawer, his hands shook, and his voice faltered. He stammered something about orders from above, then fell silent. The meaning was clear enough. He was complicit or terrified of someone who was. Without another word, Anne dismissed him. But as he left, she caught the faintest whisper under his breath. It wasn't supposed to go this far. The phrase echoed in her mind long after the door closed. She knew then that the tragedy unfolding around them was not a sudden calamity, but a deliberate act, executed with precision and cruelty. Camilla's supposed illness was not the tragedy itself. It was the smokescreen that masked a much greater betrayal. That night, Anne took no chances. She made copies of every incriminating document and sealed them in a folder marked only with her initials. Then, under the cover of darkness, she delivered the duplicates to Prince William's study. Her face betrayed no emotion, but her voice, when she spoke, carried the weight of generations. "You need to see this before anyone else does," she said. William looked at her, confusion fading into alarm as he scanned the forged report, the code name, the letter to EP. Every line was a dagger aimed at the heart of the crown. The realization settled between them like a storm cloud. Camilla's illness was not a tragedy of circumstance. It was an act of design. Anne's silence became her weapon, and her next move would awaken a storm that could crown or crush her brother's future. When Anne delivered the forged report to William, his reaction was not rage, it was resolve. He knew now that this tragedy was engineered. But what stunned him most wasn't the deceit, it was the motive. Hidden in the language of the documents was a subtle message aimed directly at him. He will not ascend. Camilla's fall was a trap meant to destroy the heir before his rise. That night, sleep became a stranger. William sat alone in his private study, surrounded by files that no prince should ever have to read. Every page, every phrase, dripped with manipulation, falsified medical notes, counterfeit signatures, and carefully worded statements designed to mislead the nation. The documents formed a web of deceit, and at the center of that web was his own name. His hands tightened around the papers as the truth sank in. This was not an act of fate, but an act of war within the palace walls. The Queen's illness was no misfortune. It was a weapon. Hours passed, the candlelight burned low, and the silence grew oppressive. William's eyes moved from one forged document to the next, and something strange began to emerge. A trail of handwriting patterns that didn't belong to Camilla or her doctor, but to someone much closer. The markings matched the personal style of Camilla's private secretary, a man who had long been known for his quiet efficiency and absolute loyalty. But loyalty, William realized bitterly, was the first illusion to collapse in times of power. The secretary's involvement meant the scheme had help from inside, perhaps from those who had sworn to protect the Queen herself. As the clock struck 3, Anne returned to his study, her face pale with exhaustion, but her voice steady. "You understand what this means," she said. "If her secretary is involved, then she wasn't acting alone." William didn't answer at first. He simply stared at the forged report, his mind a storm of fury and disbelief. Then, without looking up, He said the words that would define the nights that followed. If she was capable of this, then father might have known. The implication hung heavy between them. Not that Charles had ordered it, but that he had allowed it to happen, to protect the institution. For William, that realization cut deeper than any betrayal. Silence could wound as much as deceit. Anne warned him to tread carefully. "If you expose this now," she said, "you'll fracture what's left of the monarchy." But William had already made his decision. The time for waiting had passed. He could no longer stand by while lies shaped the crown's future. He began making quiet calls to his most trusted aides, men and women who had served him since his earliest days as heir. Orders were given discreetly. Files were to be reviewed, communications traced, and a full record of the forged reports compiled and secured. Every step was done under cover of routine, masked as preparations for official protocol. But in truth, it was a counter-operation, born not from vengeance, but from duty. By dawn, the first signs of sabotage reached him through back channels. A tabloid had published a premature story about the Queen's worsening condition. The details were too specific, too coordinated to be mere coincidence. William realized the leak had not come from the press. It had been fed to them deliberately to ignite public sympathy for Camilla and simultaneously cast doubt onto him. Every line in the story implied that he had been distant, dismissive, even indifferent to the Queen's health. It was a character assassination disguised as compassion. The headlines were crafted to wound, the timing chosen to perfection. William felt the walls closing in. Every move he made would now be seen as reaction, not leadership. But instead of despair, defiance took hold. He would not play the role they had written for him. He would not allow the monarchy's future to be dictated by deceit and manipulation. If Camilla's so-called illness was a staged tragedy, then its purpose was clear: to destabilize him before his rise, to paint him as unfit before the nation. But he understood something his adversaries did not. When the palace moved against him, it also exposed its own fault lines. And within those cracks, truth could be weaponized. As morning light filtered through the windows, William rose from his desk, the fatigue in his body replaced by an iron determination. The silence of the night had taught him what speeches never could, that leadership was not inherited, but earned through fire. He folded the forged report, slipped it into his coat, and prepared to face the coming storm. The path ahead would demand sacrifice. It might even demand betrayal of those he loved most. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. But even as he prepared for confrontation, a far deadlier game was being played behind another door, one that would bring the monarchy to its knees. Hours before the announcement, Charles was seen entering the royal chapel alone. Witnesses described a man aged beyond his years, clutching a sealed envelope and muttering under his breath. That envelope, later retrieved by Anne, revealed the unthinkable: a pre-signed abdication draft bearing Camilla's handwriting. It wasn't her collapse that terrified him. It was her plan to drag him down with her. The chapel was always his refuge, the one place where he could think without the weight of the crown pressing against his conscience. But on that night, solitude became a curse. The letter in his hand trembled slightly, not from age, but from dread. The handwriting was unmistakably Camilla's, elegant yet rushed, each word written with the precision of a woman who knew her time in power was ending. The document was addressed to the Archbishop of Canterbury and marked with a chilling instruction: "Activate upon my passing." It was an abdication letter, but not Charles's. It was hers, signed in her own hand, yet structured in a way that entwined his fate with hers. If she fell, so would he. Charles sat in the dim light of the chapel, reading and rereading the words that could shatter a monarchy. Her message was both confession and curse. "History will not forgive weakness," she had written. "If the crown must fall, it will fall as one." Those words struck him with the force of betrayal. Camilla hadn't merely anticipated scandal, she had planned for it, ensuring that her downfall would ignite his own. The illness, the secrecy, The withdrawal from public life, none of it had been accidental. Every move had been deliberate. A piece of theater designed to cement sympathy while dragging him into the same abyss of disgrace. At first, despair overtook him. He felt the sting of helplessness, the humiliation of being outmaneuvered by the one person he had trusted completely. For decades, he had fought to protect her, to defend her image, to restore her dignity in the eyes of a skeptical nation. And now, all of it threatened to collapse with a single stroke of her pen. But despair quickly turned to fury. Beneath the weight of his sorrow, a grim realization took hold: she had not acted alone. There were forces within the palace feeding this narrative, manipulating events from the shadows. This was no domestic betrayal. It was a coordinated strike at the very heart of his reign. Anne's discovery of the letter hours later confirmed his worst fears. She had entered the chapel quietly, drawn by the sound of movement long after midnight. When she found the discarded envelope upon the altar, her breath caught. It bore the royal seal, but the edges were creased with the kind of panic that only truth can produce. Reading its contents, Anne understood what her brother could not yet admit: that the Queen had prepared for her own downfall as part of a calculated spectacle. It wasn't self-destruction born of illness. It was political strategy cloaked in tragedy. And Charles, bound by emotion, had become her silent accomplice. The confrontation that followed between brother and sister was brief but searing. Anne's voice carried the authority of reason. "You cannot bury this, Charles," she warned. "If the truth festers, it will consume everything you've built." But the king, his face drawn and eyes hollow, simply replied, "It already has." The weight of his duty chained him to silence. To expose Camilla's scheme would mean unraveling the monarchy's carefully crafted facade, a risk he could not take while William's future still hung in the balance. His silence, however noble, was its own form of complicity. In the days that followed, Charles took measures that revealed his inner turmoil. He ordered discreet surveillance across the palace, a shadow network tasked with monitoring staff communications, physician reports, and even Anne's security detail. It was not mistrust that drove him, but the desperate need to preserve control. He was no longer ruling a kingdom. He was containing a contagion. Those who had once seen him as a dignified monarch now watched him withdraw into secrecy. Meetings cancelled, public appearances postponed, and every whisper of disobedience was swiftly silenced under the guise of protocol enforcement. To the outside world, it appeared that the king was grieving his wife's illness, but within the gilded walls, those closest to him knew the truth. He was grieving something far greater, the death of his legacy before it had even ended. Camilla's illness had never been about frailty of body, but power. She had weaponized perception, turning her vulnerability into leverage. Her apparent collapse was not a tragic twist of fate, but a political maneuver, one that left Charles isolated, cornered, and forced to play the role of the dutiful husband while his empire of trust disintegrated around him. By the time dawn crept over Buckingham Palace, the king was no longer the same man who had entered the chapel the night before. The anguish that had once clouded his judgment was replaced by something far colder resolve. If Camilla had set this game in motion, he would finish it, not through confrontation, but through control. The surveillance he'd ordered would now serve a new purpose: to protect William, to ensure that no future heir would suffer the same betrayal. But as he sealed the letter once more, and they hid it deep within his private archives, Charles understood one final, devastating truth. The monarchy was no longer united by love or loyalty, but by silence. As the king withdrew from public view, the palace descended into chaos, and the next morning, the tragedy that would shake the crown finally struck. At exactly 10:42 a.m., the palace physician issued a code scarlet. Queen Camilla had collapsed during a private audience, her pulse weak, her breathing shallow. Within minutes, emergency sirens wailed through the royal district. Yet behind the medical frenzy, Anne and William exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They knew this wasn't fate, it was culmination. The trap had finally closed, but on whom, no one yet knew. The east wing of the palace erupted into chaos. Courtiers ran through the corridors, their whispers blending with the rhythmic echo of hurried footsteps. Guards sealed entrances, doctors rushed past marble pillars, and royal attendants wept openly in the confusion. In the midst of this unfolding disaster, the line between accident and intent blurred beyond recognition. Anne's calm demeanor masked the storm that brewed beneath her composed surface. She had seen the signs, the forged reports, the calculated secrecy, the fabricated illness, and now she stood in the eye of its explosion. The Queen's sudden collapse wasn't a medical mystery. It was the final act of a long-orchestrated deception. As the Queen's personal physician barked urgent commands, one of Camilla's aides attempted to slip away unnoticed. But Anne, ever the sentinel, caught the movement instantly. "Stop him!" she ordered, her voice cold, unwavering. Guards intercepted him before he reached the exit, his face pale and trembling. Under questioning, he mumbled incoherently about being told to deliver a message, but his fear betrayed more than his words. When Anne pressed him on who had given the command, he broke down entirely, pleading ignorance. Yet even as he was escorted away, a deeper truth lingered unspoken. He wasn't fleeing danger. He was fleeing exposure. Moments later, a small glass vial was discovered near the Queen's desk, shattered, its contents still faintly visible on the polished floor. The physician examined the residue in grim silence before confirming what Anne already suspected. It was an injectable compound, one not prescribed to the Queen by any of her doctors. The meaning was undeniable. Someone had interfered directly with her treatment, either to accelerate her supposed condition or to trigger a crisis that could not be contained. But who? And to what end? The palace became a theater of conflicting accounts. Some claimed they heard the Queen gasp a single sentence before she collapsed. "He did this!" Others swore it was nothing more than a cry of pain. Yet those few words, whether genuine or imagined, sent shockwaves through the household. Every servant, every aide, every advisor suddenly became a potential suspect. The identity of the he she had allegedly named became a subject of frantic speculation. Was it William, the son-in-law who had quietly risen in influence? Was it Charles, whose silence had deepened into something darker? Or was it someone else entirely, the hidden architect behind the chaos that had consumed the crown? Through the turmoil, one detail remained constant. As Camilla fell, her hand reached for her desk, clutching at something with desperate force. When the physicians pried open her fingers, they found a single torn page, crumpled and damp with sweat. It was a piece of her private diary, the same journal that had gone missing days earlier. The writing was faint but legible, the ink hurried and uneven. If anything happens, the truth lies with the letter. He knows. The words chilled Anne to the core. The Queen's final act had not been of surrender, but of revelation, a dying attempt to leave behind a trail for those brave enough to follow it. Meanwhile, outside, the palace walls, the media storm erupted with ruthless speed. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, and within minutes, the world was flooded with breaking headlines. Tragic collapse at Windsor, Queen Camilla in critical condition. Every broadcast station repeated the same image. The palace gates closed, the Union Jack lowered to half-mast, and the speculation already running rampant. Was this the end of the Queen's reign, or the beginning of something far more sinister? For William and Anne, the public chaos was a distraction. They knew the real story was unfolding within the sealed corridors, not the newsrooms. As the palace physicians continued their futile work, Anne stood silently by the Queen's bedside, her thoughts racing. The diary page still trembled in her gloved hand, the final message of a woman who had lost control of her own creation. Whatever secrets it contained, they were dangerous enough to kill for, and now they belonged to her. As the bells of St. George's tolled faintly in the distance, signaling the gravity of the hour, Anne felt the world outside sink into mourning. But she could not grieve. Not yet. There was too much she didn't understand. Too much that didn't align. Camilla's tragedy had not come from weakness or chance. It was the echo of something deliberate, something that had been brewing beneath the surface of the monarchy for months. And now, with the Queen's fall, the balance of power had shifted forever. But while the world grieved, Anne opened that torn diary page, and the secret it contained would change everything. Inside Camilla's final journal entry was no lament, but a confession. Dated the night before her collapse, it read, "If this letter reaches light, the crown will burn before it bows." The handwriting trembled, but the intent was clear. She had been threatened, blackmailed, or both. The Queen had tried to outplay her enemies, but someone else had made the final move. When Anne unfolded that page, in the stillness of her private chamber, the ink felt alive, as though the words themselves pulsed with the weight of deceit. It wasn't a diary of reflection, it was evidence, a record of quiet terror, woven between lines of guilt and warning. For months, Camilla had believed herself trapped, not by illness, but by a force within the very walls she once commanded. The Queen's confession hinted at a hidden faction among the courtiers, a coalition of power brokers operating under a chilling name, the Council of Shadows. These weren't outsiders. They were the palace's own men and women who had pledged loyalty to the monarchy, but secretly conspired to control it from within. They had cornered the Queen, weaponized her fears, and turned her into a pawn in their grander game. The more Anne read, the clearer the pattern became. Camilla's staged illness had not been born of vanity or manipulation, but desperation. According to her writings, the Queen's retreat from public life had been orchestrated under pressure from this shadow council. They had warned her that her influence over the king was damaging stability, that the heir's growing prominence posed a structural threat to order. In truth, it was nothing more than a power struggle, a fight for control of the monarchy's narrative. By feigning frailty, Camilla had hoped to buy time, to win public sympathy before her rivals could turn the nation against her. But her scheme, meant to protect her image, had instead accelerated her downfall. Yet one passage in the diary stood apart from the rest, written in haste and underlined twice. "They said the treatment would calm me, but the dose was wrong." Anne's stomach tightened as she read it again. The line wasn't metaphorical. It referred to the injection discovered, shattered near the Queen's desk, the very vial that had triggered her collapse. It was no longer possible to dismiss it as coincidence. Camilla's so-called medical aid had been given as 5 reminders, tampered with. Someone had ensured that her final night would end not in recovery, but in catastrophe. When Anne presented the diary to William, his reaction was one of quiet fury. His hands shook as he read, the realization dawning that his stepmother's last hours had been shaped by the very machinery that sustained the crown. "This wasn't betrayal," he said slowly. "It was control." Without hesitation, he ordered a forensic investigation. The Queen's handwriting, the ink's composition, the paper's fibers, every detail would be tested. And then, in a moment of instinct that startled even Anne, he demanded something more. "Check for fingerprints." The results came faster than expected, and they struck like lightning. Traces of foreign compounds were found within the ink, the kind used to obscure chemical residue, a technique employed in high-level forgery. But the most damning discovery came from the financial trail. Camilla's physician, the same man who had attended her collapse, was linked to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The account had received discreet transfers from a trust fund controlled by a senior courtier, one known to have aligned himself with the so-called Council of Shadows. It was the confirmation William had dreaded. The conspiracy was real, and it lived inside the palace walls. The Queen had tried to expose them through coded writings and veiled confessions, but she had been silenced before her words could surface. And now, the heir held the final fragment of her truth, a truth that could either cleanse the monarchy or destroy it. Anne urged caution. "Once this leaves the palace, you can't bring it back," she warned. But William's gaze was unwavering. The diary was no longer a relic of a broken queen. It was a weapon, a mirror reflecting the rot within their own house. The burden of revelation pressed down on them both. To reveal what they knew would mean admitting that the monarchy's greatest enemy was not the press, nor the public, but itself. For generations, secrets had been buried under the guise of honor. But this was treason. born of greed and concealed behind ritual. And as the afternoon light faded over the palace courtyard, William knew the choice before him was no longer political. It was moral. The truth was finally within reach, but exposing it meant turning the crown's wrath inward, and for William, there would be no return. The confrontation was inevitable. Under the golden glow of Buckingham's council chamber, William stood before the family, his father gaunt, Anne unflinching, and a circle of pale advisors trembling with fear. On the table lay the diary, the forged medical report, and the vile fragment. For the first time in royal history, the heir accused the Queen herself of orchestrating her own downfall to destroy the monarchy from within. No one spoke at first. The air was suffocating, thick with the weight of exposure. Every gaze in that room fixed upon William not as a prince, but as a man who had crossed an invisible boundary. Before him sat the symbols of his family's legacy. His father's silence, his aunt's resolve, and the ghosts of centuries whispering from the gilded walls. Yet he didn't flinch. For too long, he had watched the crown shield corruption behind ceremony. Now, the truth had claws, and he would not let it die in silence. His voice broke through the stillness, calm but commanding. "This," he said, gesturing to the evidence laid bare, "is the price of deceit. She didn't fall, she orchestrated it. And you knew." Charles's hands trembled upon the table. His once steady composure dissolved into a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. "You don't understand," he said hoarsely, his voice frayed by exhaustion. "Everything I did was to preserve the monarchy. If this truth leaves these walls, it will destroy it." But Anne interjected sharply, her tone cutting through his hesitation. "It's already been destroyed, just quietly, from the inside. And you helped bury the pieces." Her words landed like a verdict. For a moment, even the advisors lowered their eyes. They knew this wasn't just a family dispute, it was a reckoning long overdue. William stepped closer to the table, placing his hand on the diary, his expression carved in defiance. "You told us to uphold the truth," he said to his father. "But when that truth threatened the image of the crown, you turned away. You let her play this game, and now the kingdom mourns a lie." The room fell silent again, save for the faint ticking of the clock that seemed to echo the inevitability of what was to come. Anne broke the silence with a revelation that shattered what little defense remained. From her coat, she drew a sealed document, a confession signed by Camilla's aide. His testimony confirmed everything: the falsified medical report, the staged collapse, the manipulated press leaks, and the plan to frame William as unfit to lead. The shock rippled through the council. Charles's face drained of color, his authority collapsing under the weight of proof. He sank into his chair, his voice a mere whisper. "You think I didn't see it? You think I didn't know?" His confession was not of guilt, but of helplessness. He had known for weeks, perhaps months, that the Queen's actions were unraveling the monarchy. Yet he chose silence for love, for legacy, for fear. William's expression hardened. "Then you chose her over us, over everything this family stands for." The pain in his voice was unmistakable, the ache of a son who had spent his life defending a throne built on shadows. Anne's gaze softened, but only slightly. "It's over," she said. "Whatever love existed between you and her ended the moment she turned this family into her battlefield." Charles looked up, eyes wet, voice breaking under the weight of regret. "You don't understand," he murmured. "She didn't want the crown to survive without her. She wanted it to die with her name attached." His words hung heavy, like a curse that had finally spoken its own truth. The monarchy's greatest tragedy wasn't betrayal, it was love turned into poison. As the debate raged between revelation and restraint, William made his decision. The truth could no longer remain confined to whispers. That night, he withdrew to his study with Anne at his side. Together, they drafted the statement that would define the royal family's next chapter, a public declaration of sorrow, wrapped in the language of loyalty. The world would hear of a queen's tragic decline and a nation's mourning. But between the lines of grief, every word was measured, coded, and deliberate. It was not an admission of guilt, but a burial, one last royal performance to preserve what little remained of the institution's dignity. When the clock struck midnight, the official statement was delivered to the press. It is with profound sadness that His Majesty the King announces that Her Majesty the Queen has been moved into private care following a sudden medical incident. The family thanks the nation for its compassion and understanding during this difficult time. The world believed it. Headlines mourned a tragedy. Crowds gathered in candlelight vigils, and yet none knew that within the palace walls, the family was mourning something far greater than a queen. They were mourning the death of trust. As William sealed the final copy of the announcement, Anne placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did what had to be done," she said quietly. But his reply carried the weight of every secret he now bore. "No," he said. "I did what they demanded," silence dressed as strength. For the first time, Anne saw not the future king, but a man burdened by truth too dangerous to speak aloud. And somewhere in the chambers above them, the echoes of Camilla's confession still lingered, haunting them all. By dawn, the cameras would capture tears, but none would reveal the truth behind them. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.